The first AFC North game of the 2024 season features two of the best offenses in the NFL. Which will blink first? Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, folks, and welcome on into a crossover episode on the Locked On Podcast Network. Cincinnati Bengals hosting the Baltimore Ravens, and so we've got Locked On Bengals hosted by myself, Jake Lisco, along with James Rapine, and Locked On Ravens hosted by Kevin Oestreicher, here to bring you the biggest stories and the keys to victory for both teams, as the AFC North doesn't have its first game until week 5 of the 2024 NFL season. Those games all backloaded this year. As always, Crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. You can download the app and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Shout out to the everydayers out there. Shout out to all of you who make your respective Locked On podcast your first listen. And if you're new to the Locked On Podcast Network, you can find Locked On Ravens and Locked On Bengals everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Kevin, let's start with the Baltimore Ravens offense. The addition of Derrick Henry that I kind of scoffed at when we did our preseason preview has proven to set the Ravens off to a near historic start running the football this season. Is that the biggest story for the Baltimore Ravens offense, or is there something else that supersedes the running success the Ravens have had early this year?
Yeah, I know the Devontae Adams conversation is kind of taking the cake here for a lot of these teams, maybe Baltimore included, but this is a run-first football team. And Derrick Henry, outside of Lamar Jackson, obviously, is the focal point of this team. The run game is what they are. It's who their identity is. And for me, you look at what happened last week against Buffalo, 199 yards, just 1 yard shy of that elusive 200-yard mark. But the Ravens were just gashing the Bills in so many different ways. Where for Derrick Henry, he starts things off with that 87-yard touchdown. And Buffalo obviously has to pay manpower, put manpower on Derrick Henry and that possibility, Lamar Jackson and that possibility, plus the play action game. And what Baltimore's been doing more effectively over the last couple of weeks has really been working play action off of their successful run game, where obviously the Ravens have both the leading rusher in the league in Derrick Henry and the 9th leading rusher in the league in Lamar Jackson. That is who they are. But when you're able to play heavy like they do, out physical teams like they have over the course of the season with heavy personnel, 2 tight end looks, and even though Mark Andrews isn't necessarily doing a ton this year so far, I know fantasy owners probably feel all the pain from that, but he's out there blocking. Isaiah Likely, he's out there blocking. These guys are getting physical. They've done a much better job of getting to the second level. But a lot of this also has to do with the fact that they get out to these early leads. They're in positive game scripts, and the Ravens have thrown the ball just 32 times combined over the last 2 weeks. And that bodes obviously a lot towards what they can do later in the season if they can continue in this positive game flow. But of course, with a good offense in Cincinnati, it might not be as easy to do that against a team that, if they are able to stick pace with Baltimore, might be a bit more balanced effort for the Ravens on that side.
The Ravens rushing attack has obviously been insane. I think those that saw Derrick Henry sign with the Ravens were like, well, does he still have something left? I know I passed on him in a couple of fantasy drafts, probably regretting that right now. Also might regret drafting Mark Andrews in fantasy drafts, but we can get into him a bit more in a second. I think these two tie directly together, because when you look at the Bengals, you think of Joe Burrow and you think of the offense. But to me, the biggest storyline for the Ravens is exactly why the biggest storyline for the Bengals this week is their defensive front, is how healthy they are going to be on Sunday. Because regardless of what Joe Burrow does, regardless of Jamar Chase, regardless of those guys, they have to be better than they were against the Panthers or against the Commanders or against insert whatever team that they've played this year in the trenches to have a shot at slowing down Derrick Henry, to have a shot at slowing down Lamar Jackson, what he's able to do because of that potent rushing attack. I mean, we're talking about Dax Hill's brother now for Bengals fans, Justice Hill, being a real factor on this Ravens offense. And so I do think that that's a huge a huge storyline coming into the year, and obviously the Ravens have delivered with their run game.
Kevin, how much of the Ravens running game is predicated on the option stuff that you can do with Lamar Jackson versus straight up running the ball? Because there are clips going around that I've seen on social media this week that are, praising Lamar Jackson's ability to ball handle and the misdirection that he can create with hiding the ball in some of those option situations. How would you break down the breakdown? What is the split of Lamar Jackson-led rushing attack versus traditional rushing attack for the Ravens?
Yeah, we're certainly seeing more under center this year. Obviously, it's not a bunch, but this team, whether you want to throw Patrick Ricard out there and have him either in line or just in the eye at the fullback spot, just that traditional role, the way that Lamar is able to orchestrate the option game, it's that deception. And with Gus Edwards there in the past, with J.K. Dobbins there in the past, those are two good running backs. Obviously, it's no disrespect to those guys, but Derrick Henry just has that different type of gravitational pull when you're a defensive. Oh, we actually have to pay attention to this guy. And it's a choice between Lamar and Derrick Henry, whereas before it was you might always kind of lean towards Lamar because you knew that that's the guy you absolutely had to take. Now, they also like to just run straight at you, and Derrick Henry does give you that, especially with his underrated foot speed and surprisingly good change of direction. I think people look at Derrick Henry and they just see this big, massive human and oh, he's just a bruiser. He's just a power back. But they do more straight handoffs than we've seen in other years, at least early on in Lamar Jackson's career. It was a lot of the option, read option, zone option stuff or zone reads, and they do a lot of that still. And that's why their offense can be so successful. But they're also just doing straight handoffs at times and working play action off of that. And that has been effective for them, both the option game and just other handoffs in general.
Yeah, I think that's why the Bengals defensive front and the health of it, and it does feel like they're going to get some guys back. I think B.J. Hill is going to play this week. Trey Hendrickson practice Wednesday. At this point, I expect him to play, even though he left early. You need these guys too, and we'll see how Myles Murphy, and he's probably the only one that has a shot. I think he has got a decent shot to play, but they have to be so much better to have a shot at limiting this group. I mean, you don't think the Bills knew what the Ravens wanted to do? I think that's I don't even want to say intimidating factor, but that combined with being able to shorten the game, keep the ball out of Joe Burrow's hands, that's tough. And so this Bengals defense, they're going to be tested. And that's the biggest storyline, is how healthy will they be? I expect, like I said, Hill, Hendrickson, thumbs up there. Myles Murphy, probably on track. And so you're going to be about as healthy in the trenches as you've been if you're Cincinnati in recent weeks. Will that translate into being able to slow down Lamar Jackson, slow down Derrick Henry, not let Derrick Henry get going? Because if he has that runway, good luck. No one's catching him. And we saw that on Sunday night.
Coming up next, we will flip the script and talk a little bit about the Bengals offense, the Ravens defense, the biggest stories when the opposite teams are in control of the ball. That's next.
Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the app you need to download right now, because if you're a Bengals fan and you're still looking for tickets for Sunday's game, well, Gametime is going to make it fast and easy. And Ravens fans, if you're coming to town, coming to Cincinnati, well, welcome. Use Gametime. Gametime is going to make the process so much easier. They have panoramic views from your seat, no hidden fees. So you're not going to have to deal with hidden fees, and you're going to be able to see exactly what view that you'll get with that particular ticket. So save time with Gametime. And right now, you're going to get $20 off your first purchase. All you have to do is download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
All right, guys, let's talk Bengals offense, Ravens defense. Big changes, Kevin, on the Ravens defensive side of the ball, at least with Geno Stone. And that's really what I'm talking about. The departure of Patrick Queen as well. The departure of a lot of coaches. It was a little bit rocky early for that Ravens defense, not reprising their top performance that we saw from them largely last year. Is there confidence that the Bills game got them back on track to being more of the unit that they were last year?
Yeah, I think that certainly had a big part to do with it, especially because you go out against an offense that coming into week 4 had put up almost 38 points per game, albeit not necessarily against teams like this Ravens offense. I mean, obviously Miami's floundering. Jacksonville looks, all but gone at this point. And, Arizona has had moments, but it's the misconception of Baltimore is that they were 0-2 because they were a bad football team. They were 0-2 because they lost by a toe in week 1. And then in week 2, they blew the game against Las Vegas. They are what their record says there. They're a 2-2 football team. But to me, this defense, there are always going to be questions about the replacement guy. So Trenton Simpson stepping in for Patrick Queen, guys like Eddie Jackson stepping in for Geno Stone. But the thing that has carried this defense so far, it's actually 2 things I'll say. One is the run defense, part of which we talked about in the first segment, which was a lot about, it's just about the game script. First of all, the Ravens just aren't having a lot of runs run at them because over the past 3 weeks, they've been in positive game flow. So teams have to abandon that run early, but that's why I judge yards. Total yards I don't really do. I do yards per attempt because that means in the opportunities that you are given, are you stopping the run effectively? Baltimore is first in run defense across most categories, first in total yards and first in yards per attempt. But they're getting great performances out of these pass rushers. I mean, both interior and exterior. Jadeveon Clowney leaves for Carolina. They bring back Kyle Van Noy, and everybody's wondering, well, what is he going to do this season? Is he going to have another magical year? Well, so far, he certainly is. He's second in the league in sacks right now behind only Aiden Hutchinson and has 6 of them, and that is 2 sacks in each of the last 3 games. Adafe Owe has stepped up. He has 3.5 sacks. Travis Jones looks like a beast on the interior. So for these opposing offenses, they've had to have essentially perfect offensive line games to be able to let their run game work and make sure that their quarterbacks stay protected. So on the offensive side of the ball for Cincinnati guys, I mean, we've seen this Bengals rushing attack. I think, Joe Mixon was the big name, but I think Zach Moss and Chase Brown have kind of fit in what they need a lot better with that tandem. I've been really impressed with both those guys. And look, I'll admit, I put a lot of stock into them during fantasy. So even though it's a Ravens divisional matchup here, that to me, I kind of called. How has the run game looked and how was the offensive line been able to open up holes for those guys? And even them as receivers has been a really interesting part of how Cincinnati does things.
No doubt. I think efficient is how I would describe this run game. They've been really efficient. It's not like they're running the ball a ton. Now they did last week. They ran it 30 times between the 2 running backs. And so could that happen again this week? I would be surprised. I don't think both guys are going to get 15 carries apiece. But Joe Burrow mentioned it on Wednesday. They want to be efficient. And what that does is that makes life easier on an offensive line because of the Kyle Van Noys, because of the guys that are going to try to get after Joe Burrow, because they are a passing team. And I think it is good to bring up the Zach Moss, Chase Brown as receivers. Chase Brown hasn't made a ton of big plays in the passing game yet this year, certainly capable of doing so. Zach Moss made a great play with really a huge momentum swing on the line against the Panthers, and it gave the Bengals the lead for good on Sunday right before halftime. So they trust him in the passing game. So they've been a big part of it. And I do think, it's Burrow, and you're going to need him to be awesome. He said he's going to have to play darn near perfect on Sunday for the Bengals to win the game. And to a large degree, I agree with that, even though I spent a lot of time talking about the defense. I think that what it's going to come down to from a running game standpoint, can you have a couple explosive runs in there or passes to these running backs, but you're just efficient throughout the game where you can pick up 4, 5, 6 yards and put yourself ahead of the chains. If they can do that, that would be a success.
The Bengals have been one of the best teams in the NFL on first downs this year. When you look at first downs, when teams are picking up first downs, the Bengals are second in number of first downs achieved on first down. And part of that is because of the running game, because of their ability to run more successfully this year. They're challenging teams a little bit more when they want to stay in those too high looks, and they're forcing defenders down into the box a little bit more. And as long as Joe Burrow is able to diagnose defenses in the passing game the way he is, and the running game is actually threatening teams enough, and the usage of 12 personnel, which the team has shifted in a huge swing toward 12 personnel this year after being one of the top 11 personnel teams for years. The departure of Tyler Boyd and additions of Eric All and Mike Gesicki make them the leading team this year in 12 personnel. You might be shocked to believe. It means that there's a bit of a different identity for this Bengals offense than we're used to. But one of the big themes that I'm hearing as we're talking about this game is which defense will slow down the opposing offense. And on the Bengals side of things, as James alluded to in our first segment, it's can these reinforcements on the defensive line help at all? Because the Bengals defense has been struggling with run games this year. And on the other side of things, the Bengals offense has been really good the last couple of weeks. But game script to me sounds like a huge factor. I think it's a big factor for both teams. Joe Burrow emphasized that in his presser on Wednesday as well, discussing the importance, the critical importance of getting out to an early lead. But the way Baltimore likes to play games, that part of the game will be very interesting. If a team makes a crucial mistake early, how does that impact the rest of this game? How does that impact the defensive side of the ball for these teams that has kind of gotten accustomed to different kinds of games, perhaps? Kevin, can you speak to how you think that might go if Baltimore finds itself behind early on defense?
Yeah, I think that what we saw, for example, if we want to go back to the AFC Championship game, Baltimore abandoned their identity pretty quickly in that game. And we even saw it a tiny bit in week 1 as well, where Baltimore had to play that game from behind, and they ran Derrick Henry 5 times on the first possession. They scored a touchdown, but then Kansas City came back with a couple scores, and all of a sudden they were this air-it out football team. But over the past couple of weeks, I think with bigger trust in their offensive line, and also with the ability that we have seen out of some of these other receivers to come up with timely catches. You're not necessarily still a volume passing offense. That's not what this Ravens team is. But to be able to work the run game in without abandoning it completely, if let's say Cincinnati gets out to a 10-0 fast start or 14-3, that's going to be something where the Ravens will have to lean on their passing game more, work over the middle of the field and get guys involved. But I think that they'd be foolish, and we've seen them do this and it hasn't worked, if they just say, all right, we're just going to air the ball out 40 times in this game, because part of the allure of this offense is the guessing game that these defenders have to play each and every single week, whether it is an edge defender picking the right guy on an option play, or are you coming up, you putting guys in the box. If you take that element out, if you make any offense one-dimensional, whether it's Baltimore, Cincinnati, or whatever team, that's going to be a huge detriment to what that offense is trying to do. So I would still say working play action off of that would be their best bet, because you still want to have the threat of the run game if you're the Ravens, and make sure that the Bengals or any other team is still respecting that. Because if you just do straight dropbacks the whole time, obviously that takes away a big part of what makes your offense so dangerous. And we know, guys, what makes this Cincinnati offense so dangerous is we know who Jamar Chase is. We know who T. Higgins is. Those are 2 stud star receivers. But it's been some of the other guys stepping up, especially T. Higgins having to miss some time early. You mentioned, Jake, that they're running 2 tight end sets a little more and even working in some passes to those guys. Who have been the guys that you've been most impressed with, not named Jamar Chase, that you think that people should be looking out for this week?
Well, there's a bunch, because every week it seems like it's someone different on offense, at least the past 3 weeks. Andre Yosavash against the Commanders had a really nice game, had a couple of touchdowns as well against the Chiefs the week prior. And Mike Gesicki had a big game against the Chiefs. Eric All has been really steady. And as Jake mentioned, with the 12 personnel, big part of how they are blocking and protecting and doing things that we haven't seen in the Joe Burrow era. But obviously, it starts with Jamar. I will say this, T. Higgins, he has 99 yards in the 2 games since he's been back. They could use a T game. They could use T adding, a triple-digit receiving yards game for sure. So be on the lookout for that. But, yeah, I think Eric All is certainly someone that Ravens fans should know, that Bengals fans have gotten to know over the past few weeks. They understand the impact he's made, and the rookie tight end. He's a Cincinnati native, by the way. He's made a huge impact and made the Bengals offense much more physical.
You might have a guess as to what the keys to this football game, or at least one of them, might be for both teams. We will discuss those keys to victory to finish up Crossover Thursday coming up next.
First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, Ravens fans. Hey, Bengals fans. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So for this Ravens and Bengals matchup, Baltimore traveling to Cincinnati. Baltimore opens up as 2.5-point favorites in this game. So if you like that from the Ravens side of things, maybe you want to take the underdog angle here with the Bengals, them being 2.5-point underdogs, you can go over on FanDuel and pick your side. So be sure to visit FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com.
All right, guys, let's talk keys to victory in this game. This is Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast Network. Crossover Thursday presented by PrizePicks, where you can download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Kevin, from the Ravens' perspective, what are the 3 things that need to go right for the Ravens to come out on top on Sunday?
I think first of all, this team has to be able to establish their ground game early like they did against the Bills. Obviously, I'm not expecting an 87-yard touchdown again. I think that that Ravens fans were a little spoiled with that one. But I think that if they can get Derrick Henry going early, pick up some early first downs with that, and get Cincinnati to either bring more guys into the box or just be more wary of that, like we've talked about over the course of this show, that's going to be huge in terms of keeping that in the back of Cincinnati's defense's mind for the entirety of the game. And so this team, they've been working through a bunch of different offensive line combinations. They lost 3 starters, and obviously we've talked about Cincinnati on the defensive front. What is that going to look like on Sunday? If Baltimore can out-physical Cincinnati on the ground, especially pushing them off of their spots, getting to the second level, that run game is going to, because that starts everything for this Ravens team. So the run game is going to be the first thing that I'm looking for the Ravens in this one. Second of all, it is shutting down Ja'Marr Chase. Obviously, Marlon Humphrey did not play in both of the Cincinnati games last year, and Brandon Stevens did a pretty fine job on Ja'Marr in both of those games. And with Marlon back, Marlon's playing at a really high level right now, but they'd like to use him in the slot. What they've been doing is they've been putting Marlon in the slot, using Brandon Stevens and Nate Wiggins, their rookie, on the outside. Now, there's a possibility that Arthur Millette, their starting slot corner, is going to be able to come back this week. He returned to practice after spending the first 4 weeks on IR. So I'm very curious to see how the Ravens end up defending Cincinnati, but they have, as we talked about, a lot of other guys not named Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins, if you want to throw him into the conversation, that they're going to have to worry about here. But Baltimore's defense has been very suffocating for the most part. It's been that pass defense that has been a little bit suspect over the course of the first 4 weeks. So maybe not last week against Buffalo, but the other 3. And then finally, I'm going to say control the clock and establish yourself so that you have a lead late in this game. Not that Baltimore can't play from behind, but at the end of the day, we know that this team, if they have, say, a 14-point lead, 17-point lead, the book is somewhat out on the Ravens. I think that's kind of the strategy for some teams is, hey, let's give them a big lead and see if they can hold on to it towards the end, because they have not been great about, blowing those leads. It's been difficult over the past 5 years or so for this team. But more often than not, you would at least hope, especially after what we saw in week 4 against Buffalo, that they can just ground and pound, keep your foot on the gas. That's something that the Ravens have been echoing really this entire past week. Didn't do it against Dallas, didn't do it against Las Vegas. They made sure to do it against Buffalo. So that's their new identity, is even if they're up by 17, they're not going to slow down. You have to keep that identity if you want to beat a team like Cincinnati, because they can put up points in a hurry. I know all the concerns kind of on what the defense is right now in Cincinnati. The offense, they're no slouches. We know what they can do.
Yeah, I think a lot of that makes sense. But what's interesting to me about the Ravens is the Bengals, and I'm at Paycor Stadium right now recording, like, you could say play with a lead, but if you're the Ravens, part of your explosion is running the ball. So I don't know if you're ever going to get the Ravens out of it. Like, Kevin, is there a scenario where they abandon that? They should never abandon the run. I know you mentioned play action, but I would always run Derrick Henry. Like, if you're down 10 in the fourth quarter, I'm still giving Derrick Henry touches, because that might be the 80-yard game that you want or you need.
It's so funny, because there's a very fine line between being too conservative and then not being conservative enough. And obviously when you're down, you just have to abandon all that. You're just like, all right, we have to get down the field. So if the Ravens are down, like you said, James, let's say 10 points and there are 9 minutes to go left in the game, you still give Derrick Henry touches, right? I think, maybe first down run, second down run. The thing that they can't do is you can't throw an incompletion on first down, be in 2nd and 10, then hand the ball off, and then get like 2 yards, you're in 3rd and long. Even 2nd and long situations kill you at that point. So you have to be able to run it effectively, but when you're down, you don't abandon Derrick Henry. The other thing that you can do is be a factor in the screen game. So I'm really curious. I mean, the Ravens have been terrible at screens. You can go back however many years you want to. It's been pretty bad. But they've actually been a very effective screen team this year, part of which is because Derrick Henry has come in here and done a really good job of that. So I'm not abandoning the run, but once you get down to that nitty-gritty 4th quarter, you're down by 2 scores, you have to do quick throws, make sure you pick up chunk yards, because teams are going to make you pay if you can't get chunk yards and that clock is still running.
Yeah, I think – go ahead, Jake.
Well, let's talk Bengals keys. I have nothing else to add there. I agree that Kevin's analysis is pretty spot on. And their keys go hand in hand, right, James? We're going to talk about the Bengals defensive line here. We're going to talk about controlling the game. We're going to talk about the Bengals defense in general, the offense's ability to keep up against a higher level of competition. Do you see it the same way, James? Are those the areas you're looking at, or where do you differ when you're thinking about the 3 top keys for the Bengals?
Score 35 or more.
Yeah.
That's it. Tell me if you do you have 35 or not?
Maybe 42.
They haven't done it this year. Yeah, right. And I was going to say 40. I feel like it's just almost unreasonable in this day and age to say that. So 35 is the mark. So key number 1, score 35. Key number 2, get off to a fast start. I do think that matters. I'll say why in a second. And it isn't because the Ravens are going to abandon their bread and butter. And then number 3, it's win the turnover battle handily. And I think all 3 go hand in hand. And here's why. If the Bengals get off to a hot start on offense and end up scoring 35 plus, Lamar and the Ravens, they might be able to keep up and stay with their ground game, but they're going to pass a little bit more. They're going to try this defense a little bit more. And the less you have to deal with Derrick Henry running between the tackles, the less you have to deal with Lamar Jackson in that ground game, I think the better. I think that this secondary, if there is an area where you would be like, okay, well, they have a shot here, it would be the secondary. It would being able to contain this passing game for the Ravens. And so maybe that does lead to turnovers. That does lead to the Ravens fumbling as they're driving downfield for the game tying score, and it forces them to press a little bit. I think it all goes hand in hand there. And to me, defensively, it's unrealistic, even though I spent a lot of time talking about the health of these guys, to expect BJ Hill, who's going to be back, Trey Hendricks, expect these guys to stop Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. So if you're playing from ahead and you're winning the turnover battle, you give Joe Burrow a few more touches, then could he put up 35 plus? I think it's realistic, and he has done it against the Ravens. He scored, led the Bengals to a 41-17 win over Lamar and the Ravens at M&T Bank in 2021. So they need something similar to that. That's the Jamar Chase spin move game.
Yeah, it's a tall task, let's say, for this Bengals defense right now. I think that it's kind of cliche to call it a key, but these big momentum swings, the turnovers, points off turnovers, if that kind of happens early in this game, teams steal possessions here or there, I think that's significant. Teams have been very willing to go for it against this Bengals defense early in the season too. I would expect the Ravens would be in the same situation if they get into 4th and shorts near midfield. And so if they can get a 4th down stop for once, count that as a turnover, those sorts of plays I think are pretty significant for the Bengals as well. But I think that the thing for me is keep the offense going, because I don't have that confidence in the defense right now, right? You got to find something to help with Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson needs to play at more of a level that he did in week 2 against the Chiefs, and we've seen from him the last couple of weeks and coming off an injury. And he practiced, as you mentioned, James, on Wednesday, but that's a lot to ask of Trey right now. So it does feel like a challenging game for the Bengals, but it is at home, the first of these 2 matchups between these teams. And hopefully the home field advantage plays to the Bengals' favor if you're rooting for the Bengals in this one. Kevin, any closing thoughts from the Ravens' perspective?
I think that the big thing has really been the evolution of Zach Orr over these first 4 weeks, where I know we talked about it all over the past couple of years, guys, that Joe Burrow and this Bengals offense could not figure out Mike Macdonald. And that was something where it's like, can you finally get over that Mike Macdonald hump? Mike Macdonald's gone, and Zach Orr's a first-time play caller. And we have seen that he's not necessarily a super aggressive blitzer, at least not as much as McDonald was, and nowhere near Don Martindale. That's a whole different stratosphere. But I think what we've seen is he's being able to adapt his personnel better. And over the course of these first 4 weeks, we've seen him come in with an identity, and these players are playing for him. And it's been a group effort. There are a lot of questions about this group of could they bounce back? They were a historic defense last year. I don't think anybody was expecting that again this season, but especially in the run game, they haven't fallen off there. In the passing game, they're improving. So it's just a matter of being able to, you're not going to stop, I'd say, the Cincinnati offense, but can you do enough to slow them down to where you can play your game? And I agree with you guys too. Fast start. I mean, for either of these teams, whichever team gets off to a fast start could be the team that establishes momentum. But regardless, these AFC North matchups, we know they can get kind of weird at times. So I'm not ruling out any tomfoolery in this one either.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going to close things. This is the highest over-under of the week. Last time I looked, I'm expecting, as a result, a 14-3 final score somehow. No, I'm joking. I don't actually think that, but things can get weird in these games. For more on these games, we'll have you covered from the Bengals perspective on Locked On Bengals. Kevin will have you covered from the Ravens perspective on Locked On Ravens. And that's going to do it for this episode of a Locked On crossover on the Locked On Podcast Network.